right, D'Marco Farr is in for Sedano. It's Sedano and Cap here on 710. And here he is. I mean,
don't be scared.
Don't
be scared. Face your enemy. Come on.
I don't know about enemy, but I'm.
He calls you a crumb of a nacho.
That is true. I told you it hurt my feelings more that he called me a radio hack.
Well, it should have. It was a pretty heated discussion that we had, and certain boundaries had to be drawn, and that was it. Sometimes there's collateral damage when you're having an argument on the radio.
This is true.
That's right. You want to know what happened that day, D'Marco?
You cried?
No.
What happened?
What happened was Chris had been at an AEW show in Baltimore, right? And he said something about Lamar Jackson.
Oh, what'd you say? You don't like Lamar?
No, I love Lamar. He was at the show, and someone told me about 10 minutes before that he was there in the front row, and I was doing some kind of a heel promo, and I said, I'll even take on Lamar Jackson, or whatever I said. And they showed him, and he was close up with his hand over his face. But yeah, but now I'm a big fan of Lamar. So not necessarily, but I just heard he was there.
Were you defending
and
Lamar or
decided to jump on him.
No, I did what I normally do, which is I come up with what I think is some brilliant idea. So I say, well, hey, Chris, when you're in L.A., why don't you call out LeBron, And then Chris decided to tell me, what are you like an idiot? Do you think I don't know this? What do you think I don't know LeBron plays for the Lakers?
Yeah, you're going to tell me what to do now? Do I tell you how to put on headphones and talk into a mic, huh? Do I, huh?
I think he knows what to do.
So that's where the crumb of a nacho came from.
But why the crumb of a nacho?
That's what you said.
I don't know. You decided to insult me. You said, what are you, some radio hack? What are you, like some little crumb of a nacho?
Crumb of a nacho.
Yeah.
That's you. See?
Oh, you have the soundbite there. I'm glad you have the soundbite on cue. Can I hear that nachos. Again? 3, 2, 1.
Crumb of a nacho.
People wanted to make T-shirts out of the whole thing.
I remember.
Yes.
I remember. Yeah, exactly. Wow. All I asked for was my 10% royalty.
Chris Jericho is in studio. AEW Dynamite is tomorrow, May 29th, at the Kia Forum in LA. I heard you actually earlier today making the rounds on some local TV, saying that the Forum has really become kind of like a top spot for wrestling.
Well, for us, for AEW, yeah. Like, I don't recall ever wrestling in the Forum before. Maybe once in the 90s when there was like an older Forum there. But we started wrestling the Forum probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it's become our home base on the West Coast in the Southern California area. So we've made it a pretty kind of must-see TV moment whenever we come to town.
So Wednesday at the Forum, and then Thursday in Palm Springs at Acrisure Arena, which is the new arena that was just built out in Palm Springs. Big D, that's your crib right there, dog.
Right.
Yeah, boy.
Acrisure Arena, baby.
Yeah,
that's cool. It sounds nice. So Palm Springs is great. We went there for a show a couple times, but we've never been there with AEW. So it's kind of a grand return, triumphant return to Los Angeles, and then making our debut in Palm Springs. So it's going to be a good 1-2 punch Wednesday and Thursday.
What do you got tomorrow night?
Tomorrow night, we're debuting a new segment called TV Time with the Learning Tree, Chris Jericho.
Yeah,
so TV Time. Who wants more TV time? I do. So we're going to get it tomorrow night on Dynamite.
So the Learning Tree is the new character, right?
Yeah.
Yes. The Learning Tree started, it's fairly new, maybe only about a month or so. I was getting such vitriol from some people on social media and critics and along those types of lines, and not really understanding how the wrestling business works or my place in it. So I thought, well, I'll just lean into it. Having 33 years in wrestling and all the experience that I have and the mentorship that I do and kind of provide to the roster of AEW. And so it's kind of fun to kind of turn all of their critiques against them. Hi, guys.
It's nice.
Hi, guys.
Years.
Hi, everybody.
How many more years you want to do this?
I mean, I don't really put a time limit on it. Like, when AEW started 5 years ago, had we not started this company, I don't know if I'd still be wrestling right now, because very creatively stimulating and kind of reignited the passion that I had for wrestling after doing it for so long. So I just kind of take it on a not by week basis, but just how I'm feeling. And if I can still continue to perform at a high level and still be what I consider Chris Jericho should be, then there's no reason really to stop.
You tell a great story, still compelling.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, like, how, when you start promos, like, where does that come from, and how do you keep it all together as you're cutting a promo? Like, talking to Lamar Jackson and running him down, or talking to Cap and running him down. Where does that come from?
Well, there's a lot of improv. You know what I mean? You just have to commit and go for it, and just don't be afraid of anything. That's the best thing, because like you mentioned, the storylines are the most important part of wrestling. I mean, it's the connecting with the crowd that means more than any quote-unquote 5-star match that you could have. And that's character. You know what I mean? You have a great character that people love, and the match falls after that, but you have to get people interested in what you're doing first and foremost. So there is a lot of improv. You know, I mean, I studied here in LA, 10 years ago with the Groundlings and learned that you play it straight and you commit. And that's what I do, and once again, not the Lamar case. I didn't even know he was there till like 5 minutes before, and wasn't familiar with him because I wasn't as much into the NFL as I am now. So he's the quarterback. Okay, well, as soon as I got out there, I saw him. Easy target.
Right.
Because no one else had mentioned him yet, And that's just kind of what wrestling is. Like, you're the puppet master, you're the party host. You want to make sure that people have a great time. And if that means having them cheer you or if that means having them boo you, that's both the same. Boos are the same as cheers for us when you're playing a heel, the bad guy.
Silence is bad.
Silence is bad.
Yeah.
And that was the super hard thing during the lockdown. We're wrestling in front of no people and no sound. And that's kind of really how we base what we're doing during a match or during a promo. Oh, they're really reacting to this. Let's do more of it. They're not reacting to that. Let's get away from it. So that it really is like being an improv comic or, a jazz musician or something where you're kind of just going with the flow, listening to how people are taking it and how they're enjoying it and reacting accordingly.
See, it was you. You brought him
I
into
must
that.
have.
That's
I didn't mean to.
The crumb of a nacho.
Right. Chris Jericho's in studio tomorrow. AEW Dynamite is at the Kia Forum. Chris, when you say 33 years, right? So
Yes.
you got into wrestling as a young guy. I mean, 20 years old, right?
19, actually, yeah.
Wow.
Right.
I was a
And
teenager.
Can you kind of explain how that even happened?
It's hard because, this you're talking 1990, so pre-internet, pre-anything. And that's a great question. How do you make it happen? When I told people I wanted to be a wrestler, they're like, what? Wrestler? You're too small for that. Ah, ha, ha. And I never really cared about what people thought, but to me it was like, how do I do this? Like, how do you get in? Someone's got to get into wrestling. Like, if there's wrestlers on TV. And for me, I was watching Calgary Stampede Wrestling, which was about 14 hours west of where I grew up in Winnipeg, Canada. And they just had this address for the Hart Brothers Pro Wrestling Camp. And so you get your pen and paper out,
Right.
and if you can write it down quick enough in time, or if you're not recording it, then you got to wait till next week. Or if you are recording it, you press pause, and it's got the little shaky VHS pause with the static on it, and you write it down, and then you send the self-addressed stamped envelope and anxiously await. And 2 or 3 months later, I got a pamphlet in the mail saying this is what you can do if you want to become a pro wrestler, and just started focusing on that from that aspect. So it really was, it was only 30 odd years ago, but it might as well have been the dark ages about how we connect and how we got information back then. You just didn't know.
You went through Stu Hart?
Yeah.
That whole, do you know about the Harts and how they train the
dungeon?
down? You went through the dungeon.
The dungeon,
down there?
yeah.
Was
the
it really
dungeon.
as painful?
It was kind of a more modern version of the dungeon, but there was a lot of dungeon elements to it, to where you had to really kind of show that you wanted to be there, or else you'd be gone. Like, my class was like a Friday the 13th movie. It started with like 15 people, and they kept just dwindling. So there's 12. There's 10.
Yeah.
Where did everyone go? Don't go outside, because the guys would just leave and never come back. And it ended up being with 2 of us, actually 3 of us actually graduating, and the other guy was a guy called Lance Storm, who wrestled for years.
Oh my God.
He and I trained together, and we're the 2 that made it out of the dungeon alive, so to speak.
I like Lance. So they would put you in a hold and see how long. Yeah, put you in
basically,
something you couldn't get out of.
Yeah,
and it's painful.
the first night I was with a guy called Keith Hart, who was Brett's brother and Stu's son, and we used to wrestle in the basement, and on we call them porta pits. They were like big fat gym mats, like when a guy does a pole vault.
Yeah,
those mats they landed. We used to wrestle on those, so we learned how to. Someone would go to give you a backdrop, and we figured out how to over rotate and land on your feet, kind of cool, whatever. And so Keith Hart came in the ring first day and threw me off the ropes and said, take a backdrop. We hadn't learned anything. Didn't even know how to hit the ropes. Didn't know anything. But when he gave me the backdrop, I landed on my feet. And I thought, I'm going to be the next Owen Hart. This guy's going to love me. And the moment he did that, I guess he thought I was being a smartass or something, as if I could be. And he put me in like a headlock, and the top of my head and the bottom of my chin to where my teeth were like pressing together, and I could feel my front teeth and my bottom teeth. Like, he's gonna break my freaking teeth. And the only thing that saved me back then they would love it if you were screaming in pain.
Yeah,
that would be the cue to keep going. I couldn't scream in pain because I couldn't move my mouth.
Wow.
And he finally just let it go, and he called me a gearbox.
What's a gearbox?
I don't know.
Kind of like a crumb of a nacho.
I guess, yeah, exactly. That'd be I'm a gearbox. So that was kind of the first initiation to where these guys are serious, and if you don't take it seriously, they're going to beat the hell out of you. And it's a great lesson to learn because we learn the respect for the wrestling business right out of the gate. Which, you know, that's why I have such a deep connection to it and stand up so much for pro wrestling and do rebel against, you know, people that think they understand the business, because unless you're in the business, you really don't get it, you know, and that's okay. You don't have to get it. I don't understand the intricacies of being on an NFL team. I'm still a giant fan of the game and love watching. I just don't have to try and be an expert and be negative about the things I don't understand.
That's the best apology you're going to get for a radio hack.
Yeah, right
That's
on.
it. That's all you're going to get.
Chris Jericho is in studio, and AEW has a show tomorrow night at the Forum, and then on Thursday night out in Palm Springs. Where did you go from there? After you get out of that school?
I mean, I got 4 books detailing it, man. But I mean, basically, it was Canadian Indies to Mexico, which at the time was a great place to go because it wasn't based around size.
Lucha.
Because early 90s was still really 6'8", 300-pound muscle guys. But going to Mexico, like you said, Lucha was more about just having, you know, really exciting, high-tech matches. And then I was kind of one of the bigger guys there for that. And then same thing translating when I went to Japan, and then kind of worked my way up the ladder. You guys know kind of the rest of the story there. But I think the big key was going overseas at that time, because it wasn't about the size. It was about how good you could wrestle.
Yeah.
And that really made a big difference for me.
The reason I ask is because when you were super young in the business, and now we're talking probably like in the mid-90s-ish, like I still think of Hogan, Piper, Dusty Rhodes, Ric Flair.
course,
I mean, those were my guys as a kid. And you were kind of the young guy when those guys were still.
Those guys were all, my first big American company was WCW, and the big thing at the time was obviously the NWO with Hulk, and then Piper came in, Savage was there, all those guys. The same with me, all the guys that I was huge fans of, they were all in that locker room with me. Not that we ever got a chance to wrestle with them. For whatever reason, the powers that be or the guys themselves would never want to wrestle with the young guys, which is such a shame. Like, I would have loved to have wrestled Randy Savage, like one of my heroes. We would have torn the house down. And as a matter of fact, when I left WCW to go to WWF in '99, I saw him one night, and he's like, I wish you and I could have had a match. And I was like, well, man, you could have asked for one, you know. But it just was a different world back then. Once again, you really had to kind of pay your dues sevenfold to even get in the ring with those guys, even though we were more than capable to have great matches with them. I mean, I think of Eddie Guerrero at the time, just a massive heel. He could have torn the house down with Sting or those types of guys, you know. Or I would have had great matches with Roddy Piper, or at least great promos. But they would never. It never transpired. I did work with a lot of those guys when they came back to WWE. I worked the whole program with Hulk, which was amazing, and did a few things with Piper. Even had a WrestleMania match with Piper. So I did get a chance to work with them. Probably for the best that we waited until I was actually ready, and then I could call the shots for those guys and make them look good rather than the other way around.
Yeah, wow.
That was my dream match: a mid-'80s Savage and you.
Yeah, but
even
mid-'90s Savage, like if it was Jericho versus Savage in '97 or '98, they would have been great matches. Because Randy,
the small trunks with the stars. That guy.
Randy would have been able to lead me through physically. Athletically, I could have been right there with him, and psychologically, I was starting to get it. But I think we would have had, it's one of those, if you get a video game and you can put Jericho and Savage in there, that's the kind of a dream match that unfortunately will never happen. But I wish
walking on Piper's Pit, I would go nuts. That would be
fantastic. But that's the beauty of wrestling and having the longevity that I've had to being able to have worked with those guys.
Yeah.
And then here we are talking about, Wednesday night and all the guys that we have in AEW now, from MJF and Orange Cassidy and Jack Perry and just, these young cats that we're working with, Big Bill and Brian Keith, and just putting everybody on the map and building up these younger guys the way that those guys helped me to do that when I was their age.
Do you think that someday that you can get back to when wrestling ruled the planet?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think in a lot of ways wrestling's bigger now than it's ever been, only because of the rights fees. We're talking sports here. You guys know live sports is kind of the last commodity of cable television, to where NHL or NFL or even pro wrestling like AEW, it's very valuable because people are watching it in real time, which means they'll watch the commercials in real time, which is valuable to advertisers. So there's so much money at stake nowadays with television rights and live sports that I think the money that wrestling is getting between WWE and AEW, it's never been like this before. Before it was really based also around house shows, live events, tickets sold, pay-per-views sold. Those are kind of all by the wayside. Now it's about these television deals that you can get. As far as wrestling ruling the world, I mean, you're talking about the late 90s. What was available then? Still 5 channels, 10 channels, 20? Now there's 10,000 channels. So I don't think the ratings for wrestling will ever get back to 10 million people watching a wrestling show unless you switch it over to streaming. But who knows, man? Like I said, I think the cultural zeitgeist of pro wrestling is cemented forever. And it's always going to be a very important part of the culture of North America and the culture of the world.
You and Kappy would do 10 million. You and Kappy in a cage would do 10 million.
10 million pesos.
Chris Jericho is in studio here on Sedano and Cap on 710 ESPN. Chris, I got to ask you this. At what point, because you mentioned you have 4 books, and to me, what I find most fascinating about you is best-selling author, traveling around the world as a lead singer in a rock band, the wrestling, the podcasting. So if I could just go one by one, just start us off with podcasting. I was telling Chris before he came on, I was at a National Association of Broadcasters convention in Dallas, Texas, probably 5 years ago.
I remember that, yeah.
And Chris was like a keynote speaker about podcasting because he was so far ahead of everybody else. How did you start podcasting, and when did that all happen?
Well, I was always doing radio shows. I did a couple shows on Sirius XM, like rock and roll shows, and the last one I did had an interview element to it. And then when that one ended, it was just the advent of podcasts. I remember the first podcast I ever did was wondering why my publicist booked me on a podcast, because I thought it was something that college kids did, or the typical guy's in his basement, whatever. It was Adam Carolla's show, and you walk in there, and there's at the time, and I'm sure he's eclipsed it tenfold. It said world podcasting record, like 500 million downloads, and I was like, what? Or whatever it was, 50 million, 500 million. It was some ridiculous number that I couldn't believe. This is what a podcast is. People listen. And that's kind of where it started. And I'm a journalist. I have a journalism degree. So I always like kind of the interaction and the interview aspect of it. And I just started doing it. It was December of, I believe, 2013 is when we started Talk is Jericho, and haven't stopped twice a week ever since, every Wednesday, every Friday. So, yeah, nowadays I think there's literally 1 million podcasts. Yeah. There's so many. But because I came in early on and it established a fan base, and it's not easy, as you guys know, to host a show. A lot of people think they can do it, and they come and go very quickly. It is not easy to be a host of a show, especially when people don't want to talk sometimes. You're like, Mike Tyson, you do understand the concept of being on a podcast is to talk.
I ask questions, you answer them. Let's go. Work with me.
And if you don't, then I'll talk, because I got 45 minutes to fill one way or another. Yeah. So that's kind of, I think there's an art form to it. I think people know when they do my show, they're going to have a great time. I don't ask the same dumb questions. I don't care about controversy. We just have a lot of fun. And that's kind of the reason why the show has done so well, and why, here we are in our 11th, 12th year, whatever it is, still higher than ever.
So podcasting, then authoring 4 books.
It's actually 5. I miscounted.
Come on, man.
5
Come on,
books.
dude.
Yeah,
really?
man.
Come on.
Yeah, there is.
5 books. How did you decide, hey, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to write another one. I'm going to write another one. Well, and where do you find the time?
Well, once again, it's from journalism, right? So I always knew that I wanted to write a book, and I knew that I would write it myself. I don't need a ghostwriter trying to capture my voice. I'll capture my own voice because I've been writing my whole life. So yeah, I with the story that I had of traveling internationally and kind of having this seemingly outlandish dream, not just 1 but 2 with rock and roll too, it just was really lent itself to writing kind of these stories. And the first 3 were just straight autobios. The 4th one was kind of a self-help book. How to make things happen. No is a 4-letter word. How do you make dreams come true? And then the 5th one, I kept a log of every single match I ever had since October 2nd, 1990, up until whenever I wrote that book in 2020. So I had every match, and I was like, here's a log if you're interested in an entire career of Chris Jericho. Because I remember when I first started, the aforementioned Keith Hart, I asked him how many matches he had, and he said he didn't know, and it was a dumb question. And I was like, well, I don't see it as a dumb question, because if I want to know how many games Wayne Gretzky's played in, I can go to the library, there's an old school term, and get out a book and find out every game, every goal, every assist. Why can't it be that way for wrestling? So I kept a log. And I might be the only wrestler who's done that for the career as long as I've had. And so I thought, well, let me publish it and, do some essays about it and that sort of a thing. So, when do you get the time? I mean, we have a lot of time. It's not like I'm working 7 days a week. And when you get into book writing mode, it obsesses you and you find the time. The time finds you. You need to make it happen. But it's a great undertaking to write a book. And, I don't know if I'll ever be able to write another one or maybe someday, but it takes a long time to write a book, at least a year. And it's a lot of hours. I think my first book, when I divided the amount of money that I made for the hours I put into it, I think literally it ended up being like 73 cents or something. And it was a sizable deal, too. And I was like, man, I could be working in a sweatshop somewhere and be making more money than this.
My buddy's writing a book. He's going through it, too.
It's hard.
Rock influences. Who did you grow up listening to? Because you're a frontman for the band Fozzy.
Yeah, and not only that, but I used a lot of frontman techniques in wrestling when I first started because I knew, like, I couldn't be the biggest guy in the show, but I could have the biggest personality and the biggest character and be, kind of the conduit, the party host, like I said. So Paul Stanley, Mick Jagger, Freddie Mercury, David Lee Roth, all the great frontmen in rock and roll history.
Yeah.
Bruce Dickinson, guys that I really admired on how they were able to really take a crowd into the palm of their hands. And so I kind of transferred that into wrestling, and then we started Fozzy. I transferred those tricks that I was doing in wrestling back into being the frontman of a rock and roll band, and it's all reciprocal. They're very similar. Like I said, it's about connecting with the audience and making sure they're having a good time. And if you can do that, they'll always come back.
I've never connected. Your intros are just as good as your matches and your promos, like when you come out.
Thank you.
I never connected that with being a frontman, but when I think about it, can I even mention your other stuff?
Sure.
I mean, like your Y2J stuff.
Of course.
All that stuff was like frontman rock and roll stuff.
Right. Well, that's how you get people's attention and get them understanding what you're out there to do, which is, you're a showman. That's what wrestling is. It's rock and roll, man. It's a modern day, Shakespearean morality play. It's a combination of all these things. And when people go to the show, I will never walk out onto the show what I'm wearing right now. There's always a change, and there's something that you want to look different with, or whether it's a light up jacket or a jacket with spikes on it, or whether you're putting paint on your face, or whether it's a sparkly sequin jacket, or whatever it is that's fitting with what you're doing at the time. There has to be a show business element to it, because that's what the business is. That's what the wrestling business is. First and foremost, is show business. That's it. And you have to think of it that way.
So you've got the band, the books, which you mentioned are already published and written and published, but wrestling right now. And I say, how do you juggle all this time? And you say, well, I'm not working 7 days a week, but is there a time where you're touring with the band and you're like, hey, I need a month or two away from wrestling, or do you go back and forth between?
Can you do both?
Yeah,
you can do both. The good thing about AEW is we pretty much, for the most part, work 1 day a week. For me, it's usually Wednesdays. And when we tour in the States, Tuesdays and Wednesdays are off every week in case I need to go and do Dynamite wherever it might be. And then if we tour, the UK, we've got a huge fan base there, then I'll take a couple weeks off. That's the beauty of it. Our roster in AEW is so huge with so many great performers that you can take a couple weeks off, and it actually works out to be a good thing.
I was talking to a friend of mine. He's an actor, and I was telling him about football and how I let a guy take my rep because he was practicing pretty good and had a chance to make the team. So take the rep for me. And that was a big deal to me because usually you don't. You're competing for jobs.
Right.
Did you grow up in the wrestling business that way? Like when you had an opportunity to let a guy shine, you actually moved over so he could shine to get that shine?
Well, you work together. You know what I mean? You make each other look good. I mean, that's the bottom line of what wrestling is. It really is like improv comedy. It's a team sport. And yes, the goal is always to make the other guy shine.
Yeah, because I hear stories about guys keeping guys down.
Well, yeah. And you have that too. But I've never had that element to me ever, which is also another fun part of the learning tree is for some reason there's a rep that some people think that I do that. And it's been the opposite. I mean, when we started AEW 5 years ago, I knew I had a short window of time to build as many stars as I could or we could, because it can't just all be about Chris Jericho. It's like, Atlas holding up the world. You're pretty much going to crumble fairly quickly unless you get a couple other shoulders in there. Suddenly you get 10 shoulders, then there's 12, then there's 20. That's how the company grows. That's why we've done so well in 5 years. We've done a really good job in creating stars. And that's homegrown stars, that's stars coming from Japan, that's stars coming from WWE. I mean, you look at a guy like Jon Moxley in AEW, he's a million times bigger of a star as he was in WWE. And
Didn't like him before, love him now.
And better of a wrestler.
Yes.
Because mentally, he found the place where he wanted to be. Creatively stimulated, like I said, and the passion was reinvigorated. And there's been a few guys that have come over from like Bryan Danielson. He's on fire right now. He's one of the best wrestlers I've ever seen. Better now than he's ever been. I mean, there's just something about AEW when you love wrestling, and you really love wrestling. AEW is the best place to work.
Chris Jericho, I swear to you, honestly, we could talk for hours. I know you got places to go and things to do.
Ask him about Goldberg. I'm just kidding.
One thing, though, last thing. So I do this thing every year, and people bust my chops about it. So I'm 54 years old. I know. You probably thought I was like 35, right? Okay. Every year I take a picture of myself. Hey, this is what 54 looks like, people. This is it right here. You kind of do the same thing.
I do, yeah.
Only the thing is we look different.
Well, the thing is, too, people would bag on you no matter what. And I love that. I mean, I've said it I went and saw the Rolling Stones a week ago, and Mick is 80, and he moves great and sounds great. And there's still people, Mick Jagger sure looks old. Hey, he's 80, running around stadium stages, okay? You can say anything you want. When I'm 53 with a six-pack of abs and you're going to bag on that, I have no problem with that whatsoever. Zero whatsoever.
This was my picture at 54 years old earlier this year.
Looks great.
And you know what people told me?
What?
They said, you're carrying around a lot of visceral fat.
Visceral fat.
Visceral fat's a thing.
Yeah.
Visceral fat's a thing. You
That's
got
what
to watch
they told
that.
me.
But you know what I mean? And the people that are saying that to you are probably 20 years younger with twice the visceral fat, right?
Wow.
I don't worry about anybody that doesn't like me. I really don't, because I'll never get them to like me, and I don't care. I worry about the people that are fans of my work and making new fans. It's worked pretty well for 33 years. If you hate Chris Jericho, if you're listening right now, thank you. I have no problem with that at all. It doesn't bother me in the least. And you can bag at me all you want. My skin is thick. It's the people that are open and are excited about the work that I've done and enjoy being a part of the Chris Jericho universe, the Chris Jericho vortex, as they say. And this is why I do it. I do it to keep people entertained. At this point in time, it's specifically to keep people entertained. It's what I've been doing since I was a teenager, and I'll be doing it until the day I leave this earth. And I don't have any problems with that, because there's a lot of people that still appreciate that. And as long as there is, I'll be out doing it.
Right on, man. Chris Jericho, you're listening to KSPN Los Angeles. Chris, it is such a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much. And by the way, which book? I'm going to start. Which one should I start with? Seriously.
It's a trilogy. It's like Star Wars, so you got to start
with
the
start at the beginning? Okay, because I feel like...
They all relate. They all relate.
I feel like the one about no is...
No is a four-letter word, is a standalone, so you could start with that one and have a blast.
Because I always have this philosophy that no is the beginning of the conversation that gets us to yes. And people hate when I say that to them. Because if they tell me no, I'm like, oh, no, that's fine. I'll talk to you down the line. It will become yes.
No will become yes.
No will become yes.
There's always a way.
You can be arrested for that.
There's always a way to make something work. Don't tell me why it's not going to work. Tell me how we can make it work.
Right, exactly.
That's the best motto to have.
Chris Jericho.
See you tomorrow night, guys.
AEW
Thanks,
tomorrow night.
guys.
Yeah, right on. Stick around, everybody.
Thanks,
what we
everybody.
all need to know is next.